Show you Newt Gingrich. I said earlier, I like Newt because he just says what he thinks. Watch.
Look, if you're a relatively sophisticated leader around the world and you watch 9 years of the rise of Donald Trump, and you watch 2 impeachments, and you watch all of these efforts to catch him in the law, and you watch 2 assassination attempts, and the guy just keeps coming. I said the other day, this is a mythic figure, almost like the various Scandinavian Beowulfs and other kind of sagas. I mean, you can't, there's no practical way that you can explain Trump within a normal political structure. He now represents clearly something like, according to the latest Rasmussen poll, 55% of the American people believe that he has in fact got a clear mandate. Only 32% don't agree. So, I mean, he's beginning to build almost a 2-to-1 margin that this is the leader of the American nation. And if you're the rest of the world, and you realize, people forget, we are an enormous country, 345 million people. We are the 3rd largest country geographically in the world. We have enormous power, clearly still, despite every screw up at the Pentagon. We're the most powerful nation in the world. And this is the guy who's now coming back, and they all respect it, and they are, frankly, I think, stunned by it.
Stunned by it. Rick Green, let me get your take. What do you think?
All I want for Christmas is for the Trump transition to last, I don't know, a couple of years, because just the anticipation of his presidency has accomplished more than Biden in 3.5 years. Economically, world leaders coming to heel. I mean, you just go down the list. It's just absolutely incredible. But it does speak to the fact that there's a lot of pent-up frustration in America that realizes we've needed an adult in the room to lead once again. I think Newt's right. He's usually right about these kind of things. Trump is a mythical figure. I mean, this is a once in a generation, maybe even once in a century type situation. And we said it, on the program many times, but this is a transformational presidency. This isn't going to just be an occupant of the White House. This is going to be way beyond what we saw in his first 4 years and probably what we've seen in our lifetimes.
Yeah, Dutch, let me get you to weigh in on this. A transformational president. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think the contrast is amplifying Trump's persona. For years now, and it has gotten much worse. We've seen our president here and around the world fall asleep in meetings. Everybody knows he's senile. It's been an incredibly humiliating thing for our nation. And frankly, I think God has used this to humble our nation and show us our need for him. Only he can help us recover. And I was praying about it just today, and God, I felt, gave me Isaiah 61:7. He said to Israel when they were being disciplined, at one point, instead of your shame now, you're going to receive a double portion from me, a double portion of my glory, a double portion of joy. I believe God is going to restore America to even a greater place than we ever were before, because he always goes from glory to glory, strength to strength. And I think Trump will be a part of leading us into that as long as we stay the course. We need to keep praying to help them do what they're doing. It's a great thing.
It is. It is. All right, Pastor Hank, let's go back to April 16th, 2023, and let me show you this, those of you watching at home. The enemy's agenda falling like feathers. This was Pastor Hank. I'll cause my goodness to pass over this country, United States. I'll bring a vindication as I have promised. Those who seek to indict shall be indicted themselves, and as quickly as things arise, they shall fall apart, for they'll see it like feathers that fall, that have no weight. For I'll blow upon it, says the living God. And then it's not enough. They'll say, we will now look to frame it and say, you have interfered in the election. God says, go ahead and frame your accusation, your indictment. But you've left me out of the picture. It's just what Dutch was saying. But it shall be you who seek to do this that shall be unveiled, exposed for the world to see. Pastor Hank, that sure seems to be the case.
Well, yeah, and Pastor Gene, again, it's great to have you back from the Cayman Islands. But while you were there, Fanny down there, we've been saying her Fanny was in trouble. And, of course, you're seeing that happen. That case dropped. Look at Jack Smith. We've been declaring that, hit the road, Jack, don't you come back. And of course, we're seeing that fell through too. So just like the Lord said, I don't know if people can see it here, the feathers are falling. But I do want to draw attention to something that I think is very important. And it's this, the prophecy references those that, indict, they themselves will be indicted, and that God is doing this. And so what we have to see, you showed, a clips of President Trump on the world stage. And I think about another prophecy that the Lord said right at Trump's first, time that he was elected. And it said, at first they will hate him. Then they will scratch their head trying to figure him out. And then later they will join him. And this is what you're seeing happen. And then lastly, talking about feathers with that prophecy, how they would fall, reminds me of another prophetic word that I want people to hear. And it's this. God asked a question. He said, who can repair the tattered wings of the eagle? He said, I will raise up this 45, speaking of Trump, now 47, and he'll repair the left and the right. God is going to do something very uniquely with President Trump, and we're seeing it unfold. And that's why these indictments are part of God's righteousness and justice.
It is indeed. And this is why we cannot take our foot off the gas, as I always say, I know, and that we must stay engaged in this year, especially as we see the transition take place, the transformation begin. As Rick was saying, we need to see this move at a much faster rate. We've got a lot of work to do, you and I. We've got a lot of work to do in these next 3.5 years before we see the next president come in. So, and then it starts all over again. So even quicker than that, there's 2 years, there's another election. So I know Rick was going to say that, so I beat him to it. We've got a lot of work to do. All right, let me show you this. What did Donald Trump say about what he's going to do? How is he going to handle the retribution? Watch.
I'm really looking to make our country successful. I'm not looking to go back into the past. I'm looking to make our country successful. Retribution will be through success.
All right, retribution will be through success. Great line there. But Seth, let me get you to comment on that. What do you think when he says that?
Well, I think that to piggyback on what Dutch was saying, I think the contrast is so clear. And I think that there could actually be a big political win for President Trump after we send Fauci to rot on an island, of course, that has to happen, but to actually show as much grace as possible to some of the people from the last administration and just allow his successes to kind of show the contrast, because we saw how many sort of just areas of the country were turning completely orange or red that I didn't think he'd be winning. And I think it's just because people see the contrast. And as long as he continues to run on a lot of that common sense legislation to make America great again, I don't think it has to be this vindictive, let's own the libs kind of agenda, but simply focusing on putting America back on the world stage.
Yeah, but Seth, before the show, you and I were talking about this. President Trump isn't infallible. And I think we need to remind ourselves, as wonderful and as happy as we are with what has happened with this election,
right?
We've got some growth areas that that we need to stand up for and believe God to change when it comes to President Trump. Share what you were telling me.
Yeah, amen. So, Gene, I get a lot of heat from some of our friends that we won't name, none of you on the call, but just because I do go after President Trump. I do go after Vivek Ramaswamy. I do go after Kari Lake when I think that they deserve it. And what I mean by that is if someone who identifies as more of a conservative or has been elected by conservatives is going to play softball with some of the most important issues that do guarantee whether America is going to be great again or not, like the family, like marriage, like against the homosexual agenda, like the babies, little unborn babies. If you play softball with that, if you kind of do a kid glove treatment with some of these issues, you should expect we, the people, self-governing Americans, to speak out against that. And Gene, I've lost big donors, actually, when I've criticized Trump for going after Arizona's pro-life laws. And so I think it's really important for people to raise their voice. If we want to make America great again, we have to end abortion in America.
We do have to end abortion, and that's something that we are not going to back down from. Now, we've said before here, Rick Green, we're not electing a pastor, we're electing a president. We're not appointing, this isn't a group of deacons, dear Lord. So we've got a long ways to go, but we cannot compromise on our values.
Yeah, Gene, we're too often lacking in our discernment and in our cunning, right? We as Christians, we tend to, storm the hill and then go home and give up, or we throw out somebody because they make one mistake. Listen, you said it right. I mean, Trump's fallible. He's going to make mistakes in this administration, and I think one thing to keep in mind, we need to be praying for his discernment and for the people around him. Listen, he can end up like some of those kings in the Old Testament. Hey, he can grow the long nails and be grazing in the backyard, unable to communicate with people if God decides he wants to do that to this man. So we don't see this guy as our savior. We don't see him as infallible. We see him as an instrument of God. We see this administration as an instrument of God. And I think Seth is 100% right when he says, listen, we're gonna stand for truth and call them on the carpet no matter who they are or who we supported in the past, and just hold them to the standard. And that's where the discernment comes in, right? We have to pick our battles. This is politics. We have to realize you only have so many, chips that you can play in the game. There's only so many opportunities to push for things. So priorities are important. Here's the key, Gene, in a presidential administration like this. Donald Trump knows that evangelicals and conservatives are the ones that gave him the momentum to do this. We have to be a positive voice in this administration. We have a lot of people that he's appointing that are our kind of folks that will have his ear, that will be able to have a voice. And then, like FlashPoint does better than anyone else out there that I'm aware of, we call on the FlashPoint army when it's time to ring the phones, even at the White House, and say, hey, Mr. President, we need you to push for this particular thing. Or, hey, Senator Ernst or Senator Cornyn or whoever it might be, you better support Kash Patel or you better support Pete Hegseth. We've got to use the political will that we have and the political capital that we have to push in the right direction. So that was a long way of saying there's going to be days, Gene, where you've got to call on the FlashPoint army to put pressure on Trump, and then days where you've got to call on the FlashPoint army to praise Trump and thank him for what he did. And that's just going to require discernment, which we all need to be praying that God gives us. That's right. All right. Lance, I want you to weigh in on this. We've been, since this show started, we seem to take the hits on Trump. You're not standing up for Trump, or you are standing up for Trump. No, you're this, you're that. Oh, you guys, you're all on the Trump train. It gets whiplash from getting jerked around so much about the comments. That's not the point, but we do need to drive home, and I know you've done this before, that what Rick said, what I said, we need to understand what we're really dealing with here as we go into the next few years with this American president. It's great to see that he has come in much smarter this time. He's learned where a lot of the potholes are, a lot of the people already that he knows to not trust. But where do you see it going from here, Lance?
Well, Gene, I'm glad you asked, because I would differ with some of the thoughts we have tonight, just in the spirit of Ashkenazi Jewish controversy here. Here's what I would say. I'd say that you cannot just go back to a philosophy of, well, let's just put some points up on the board and bring down inflation and bring America's prestige up and forget about the past. And my gosh, we're nice Christian people. We're not out for revenge. I say that's not the right way to frame it. If you do not teach the left that they are never again to use the Department of Justice, the CIA, the FBI, the weaponizing of media in order to take out an innocent politician, frame him as they did with impeachment, accusations with the Russian laptop. If they are not punished, and I mean disincentive, you have to create a disincentive for doing that in the future. You're not dealing with Marcus of Queensberry rules here. You're not dealing with normal folks. These aren't like your in-laws that have, well, we have an honest difference of opinion. You're dealing with an almost criminal, malicious mindset. Had he not won, had we not had 1 million fake votes taken out by efforts that we put into, aggressively funded and executed in order to shrink the margin of theft, he would be right now facing jail sentencing from a nutbag New York judge. That's where the left would put him, and they wouldn't think twice about locking him up for his 47 felonies, and he's a rapist, and he's a this, and he's a, that's the script they've got in their heads. So I would say success for Trump is letting Kash Patel and Pam Bondi understand that they've got to go after how his campaign was spied on, was sabotaged, how the Department of Justice was weaponized, and how this must never happen again to an innocent American citizen simply because he represents an opposing political idea.
Well, I don't think anybody on this panel disagrees with that at all. I won't speak for them. I'll speak for myself. I agree with that. What I'm saying is we must not, when I say take foot off the gas, I'm saying exactly what you're saying. We cannot, when it comes to the political stuff, we cannot waver at all in any of that. Rick Green, I saw you that hand. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to add what Elaine's saying. 100% agree with everything he just said. There's another benefit to that. It's not just that you're, teaching the left a lesson to not do this. You're restoring confidence in the institutions of justice and all of those things for the American people. Because right now, we've got real questions about whether or not justice actually is alive and well in America. Does our system of justice still work? Is there still blind justice, or is it all just about power and will? And so if you don't hold people accountable that did the things that they did to the American people over the last 4 years, you don't restore faith in the institutions themselves. So it's also the deterrence that occurs whenever you show them not to abuse the system, but it's also just making people like us once again believe in truth, justice, and the American way, and actually believe that our systems work. So I totally agree with what Lance is saying. If the Trump administration comes in and does what they did in 2017, January of 2017, when they had been chanting "lock her up" at all the rallies, and then decided, oh no, let's play nice and not do anything and not hold them to the standard of justice. If they do that again, that's going to be a real problem, and it's going to invite more of the same, and it's going to cause us not to have faith. If, on the other hand, they prosecute people that deserve to be prosecuted for the things that they did, and Seth mentioned it, Fauci is the number one person that should be prosecuted, but even some of these DAs that have perverted justice, going after them, we're not talking about revenge. All we're talking about is actually having justice and restoring our system of justice in this country. You don't have freedom if you don't have a system of justice. We need lawyers and judges, as at the beginning. Then we'll be a righteous city once again, as Isaiah 126 teaches us.
Yeah, all right, so look at this. Amy Klobuchar. Go ahead, Pastor Hank, you had a comment?
I think what happens Jesus warned us. He said, be careful of the leaven of the Pharisees. Sometimes, to Lance's point, and I hear the conversation going, I think us Christians, we're too nice. And nice is not the fruit of the Spirit. Loving kindness is. Nice is conformity. And I think there's Christians that are watching today. You probably would have been offended with Jesus going in and cleaning up the temple. Oh, he's being too harsh, these poor people. You're just, look. Have we forgotten, and this is the biggest problem that got God angry in the Bible, is the people forgot. Look, COVID, we were lied about with COVID. People lost loved ones over their lie. They put masks on us that didn't work. They made up social distancing. They also made up all these fake Mueller reports that cost how much governmental dollars. Okay, the list goes on and on and on what the left did. And then they sat there and called us right here Christian nationalists. They told us that we were liars. They absolutely tried everything they could to discredit us and the American people. And I think it's time. Listen, there's somebody you don't pick a fight with. It's God. They have picked a fight with God, and he has chosen at this time to do what he did many times in Scripture, stand in on behalf of the people who can't speak for themselves, like abortion and other things. And this is about God's justice now. And if those are going to be hard-hearted, like Pharaoh, they're going to pay a price. And I think we need that kind of leader that the Lord could come and use at this time to administer his justice in the earth, because there's a lot of injustice that needs to be brought to light and dealt with, especially the children.
I agree with that. All right.
Amen.
Let's show you. Senator Amy Klobuchar, I want to get to this before the break, demands FBI Director Christopher Wray must be allowed to serve his full 10-year term as FBI director, which ends in 2027. Well, she's got a little bit that wrong. Look, in fact, Ron DeSantis puts her straight. The FBI director does not have a 10-year term, but a 10-year limit. The director serves the pleasure of the president and can be removed for any reason or no reason at all. President Trump has the right, and given the performance of the agency, a duty to replace Director Wray immediately upon taking office. So, in with that, Rick, I'll go to you first, since you're our resident Ron DeSantis expert. This is the sort of thing that gets one twist of the truth, whether it's intentional or not, and most of the times they are intentional, can lead you down a wrong path of thinking. It's why it's so important to get to the truth. Go ahead. I know you got a comment.
Yeah, well, first of all, he is the greatest governor maybe in the history of the United States, and certainly the best governor we got in the country right now. And all things work together for the good, for our good. Because listen, he's still governor. I know you guys didn't want him to run for president in the first place, so we still get anyway. All of that to say, he's absolutely right. And of course, we all know how corrupt the FBI has been. We all know how they covered up the laptop and they leaned on these social media companies and colluded to shut down free speech. I mean, all the evil that the FBI has done. Look at the pro-life activists that have had their homes raided early in the morning. Look at, Bevelin Beatty and these others that are in prison right now for simply standing up for the unborn. All the things that the FBI and the DOJ has done, absolutely the president can walk in there and fire Director Wray. Let's not forget that is part of the executive branch of the government, and the president should be able to, I believe, hire and fire at will every single member of the executive branch. All these civil service protections that Congress has passed for these people, none of that is constitutional in the first place. It's ridiculous. Let the president come in, especially elected with a mandate like this, and do what they think is best to execute the laws. That's the proper role of the president. And if you're going to have an FBI, which I would make some arguments for not even having an FBI at this point, but if you're going to have an FBI, the director should serve at the will of the president, just as Governor DeSantis said.
Yeah, and as we know with his appointment of Kash Patel, there's a lot of nervous people there in D.C. right now. Dutch, let me get you to weigh in on this. What do you think about the conversation so far? Give you your opinion.
Well, I think one of the things coming to my mind is understanding and being aware of the difference between justice and forgiveness. Forgiveness does not eliminate consequences of certain things. When Jesus said to the thief on the cross, "This day you'll be with me in paradise," that said two things. You're forgiven, and it's all erased, but you're still going to die here. I'm not saving your life. And so I think we can do both. I think the key for Trump and the team as they dole out justice and correct things that need to be corrected, people that need to be dealt with, is to make sure it's not done in a vindictive spirit. The American people don't want to see that. I think many of us want to see justice, but we don't want to see that poison of bitterness being poured out. And I think it would make a great statement to the nation if he and they can operate in that way. Hey, we're not out to get anybody. We're just out to see justice. And one other thing I just want to say quickly, Gene, and that is, as we are honest when we look at Trump and the team, and we point out their strengths, we point out their weaknesses. I think restoring a nation or discipling a nation back to where it needs to be is much like discipling a person. It comes in stages incrementally, and when a person's born again, we don't move into legalism and say you can't make a mistake, you can't be this, you can't be that, and judge them and throw them out of the church. We disciple them, and I think God will redisciple America. I think He's going to restore, rebuild America, and a part of that is going to be a revival that restores morality and biblical ideals and biblical thinking. And I think we just allow God to bring a balance to all of this so that we can move forward, and while we do, heal the nation.
Yeah, and isn't it interesting how much we're hearing that now that we didn't hear pre-November 5 about how America really does want to, things to go back to a more conservative viewpoint. And by the way, there is a word out that Chris Wray might actually step down this week of his own accord. Should be an interesting week no matter what. All right, but since Rick talked about governorship, let me tell you about this real quick before we go to the break. And I'll get Lance to say a comment here. We had, he went up to Trudeau. He goes to Canada. Trudeau's concerned about these tariffs that are going on, and if we're going to get these tariffs. And he goes, Trump says, you could just become the 51st state. That's a way to get rid of those tariffs. Then he posts this comment on Truth Social. It was a pleasure to have dinner the other night with Governor Justin Trudeau of the great state of Canada. I look forward to seeing the governor again soon so that we may continue our in-depth talks on tariffs and trade. All the results will be truly spectacular for all. Yes. He told him, well, if you became the 51st state, you could just become governor of Canada.
It's amazing. Only Donald Trump could be trolling the Prime Minister of Canada. Well, first of all, they're at dinner at Mar-a-Lago. And so Trump says to him, he says, the fentanyl has got to stop. The illegals have got to stop. And you owe us $100 billion. We got a trade deficit. Trudeau goes, oh, Mr. President, you know, there's no way Canada can afford $100 billion payment. And so Trump basically says, let me get this straight. You feel you're justified in ripping off my country $100 billion a year? You know what? Why don't you just become the 51st state of the United States? We could work this out. So this is the continuation of Trump getting into his head. And he's laughing about it. But then Trudeau says that they said, well, you know, our country's really rather leftist if we had it as a state. And Trump goes, no, you're right. We might need to break it up into two states. He says, and the conservatives and the liberals. He said, but you know, your title prime minister, it's more prestigious than governor. So maybe you should keep the title. I mean, he literally was toying with him, talking about becoming a 51st state. So then if you guys, see if your guys can get the picture. Trump puts on Truth Social a picture of the flag of Canada on a mountaintop with Trump looking off into the horizon as though he's saying he can make Canada great again if it can be annexed to the United States. I mean, it's an incredible, hilarious way of letting your enemies know that no amount of charm offensive is going to move you from the fact that you're going to seek the best interest of your country, regardless.
Let's talk about what's happening with Syria, the revolution. In case you haven't been watching the news, here's a quick recap from CBN about what's happening. Watch.
Syria's streets are filled with jubilation as its people celebrate the overthrow of the dictatorial Assad regime.
Assad is gone. Thank God. Thank God.
Assad and his father ruled Syria with an iron fist for more than 5 decades. The notorious prisons where the Assad regime tortured and often murdered hundreds of thousands of dissidents have now been emptied. The deposed leader, Bashar al-Assad, is in Moscow with his family, reportedly receiving asylum from his ally. The nearly 14-year civil war was suddenly capped by a sprawling coalition of Islamic rebels racing across Syria in a 2-week sprint to capture Damascus. The main rebel group is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, known as HTS. Its leader started out with Syria's version of al-Qaeda and still has a $10 million bounty on his head from the U.S.
Some of the rebel groups that took down Assad have their own grim record of terrorism and human rights abuses.
You know, we could have an Islamic State arise there, which will have profound negative implications across the region.
While many of HTS's factions seem to have moderated, and most of the rebel groups are pledging to protect Syria's religious and ethnic minorities, Biden is wary.
They're saying the right things now, but as they take on greater responsibility, we will assess not just their words, but their actions.
Some 900 U.S. troops remain in eastern Syria. Their mission is countering the brutal terrorists of ISIS.
All right, Dutch, I'll let you go first on that one.
You know, I think, Gene, one of the lessons we've learned recently over the last few years, at least, is while we watch these things, we don't always know which way they're going to go. Our responsibility is to make sure we stay focused on what God is saying and continue to pray. And so we've been praying about the Middle East. We've been declaring that the Prince of Persia there in Iran will come down and fall. And I've been having the people on Giving 15 pray for this harvest that I believe is coming to that region. So I don't know how some of this is going to shake down. I don't trust a lot of these people, even that have overthrown Assad. But I will say this, we can, through our prayers, make sure that God's agenda is carried out in the Middle East right now. We're in a season of such incredible change, and all of it for the church spells tremendous opportunity. Harvest, harvest, harvest. We got to keep our eyes on the prize and keep praying that our leaders do the right thing, that God is able through his people there to do what he wants, and we can dictate instead of just watching 4 or 5 years and say, I wish that hadn't happened.
It's true. So good. All right, let me show you this. The other side of this, look at this, what happened, Lance. Israel destroyed the Center for Scientific Research, which is chemical weapons development in Damascus. Israel's making the world a safer place by making sure chemical weapons don't fall in the wrong hands. So you've got this skirmish going on. In the meantime, that's allowing Israel a chance to get caught up on some of these attacks that need to happen. Your thoughts, Lance?
Well, it shows how interconnected everything is, Gene, isn't it? It's like the U.S., or rather Israel, weakened Iran, because they hammered so heavily at Hezbollah and at Hamas that Iran was not able to support the Syrian dictatorship. So Iran really had its influence in Syria. But it was weakened because they had picked the wrong fight with Israel. The Middle East, just for our FlashPoint audience, we got to remember, it's all a bunch of interconnected parts. So as Iran loses its power, Russia had an air base. Obama he had a red line in there he talked about. He never backed it up. Russia filled the power vacuum in Syria and formed air bases and a presence in Damascus and became a kind of a quasi-protector also for Assad. So when he comes down, he goes to Moscow. But Russia's involved with Ukraine. So neither Russia nor Iran had the ability to push back on the new variant of al-Qaeda. And I'll tell you what, it doesn't warm the cockles of my heart to know that another Islamic rebel terrorist group has just taken on a nation. The last time it happened, ISIS came out of it with Gaddafi. The difference is ISIS could flourish because Obama was president. This Islamic rebel group will not flourish with Trump as president, and they know it. Remember, against this backdrop of this nation which is now going to break up between the Kurds, Turkey, Russia, and some U.S. interests, you've got Trump telling Hamas, if you don't release all the hostages, there will be hell to pay when I am put in office on January 20th. So now you've got this vast activity going on to try to solve the problem with Hamas, because Trump is saying, I'm willing to use military force so that America doesn't have to get involved with foreign wars. And he's telling Netanyahu now, do what you got to do to fix this up so that I don't have to get involved. But what an interesting time, Gene, that you've got Syria rising up in chaos, but Trump in the White House. We will not have another ISIS. That I guarantee.
Let me get your thoughts, Rick, before we go further.
Yeah, I think everything Lance said, spot on, and it's messy, right? I mean, this is there's no the Middle East quagmire. That there's never just this simple black and white, simple, easy answer, which is all the more reason why we're so thankful that a Trump is now back in office instead of the babbling, current occupant that we knew could not handle these situations. It's going to be very telling how much our war strategy, our intelligence strategy, even I hate to use the word, but our meddling in some of these nations, how that's going to play out in this new administration, the new technology. There's so many things coming to play here, because we don't want to end up back in the situation where we're swatting at the mosquitoes as they come over and try to wreak havoc and terror in the United States. You do have to drain the swamp in some of these areas and have enough infiltration to prevent them from getting over to our side. But with the new technologies that are there now, and the mindset of a President Trump who doesn't want to actually end up with troops on the ground and be involved in a Syrian civil war and all that, it's gonna almost come back to a Ron Paul type international strategy where you're spending your money on strike teams and intelligence and that sort of thing, rather than moving the massive boots on the ground and equipment. So anyway, all that to say, this is going to continue to be incredibly interesting. I'm just interested in how different our strategy will be with Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense and a Donald Trump mentality at how to deal with these terrorists running countries. As Lance said, I'm not excited about that. What are we going to do when that happens?
It's going to be interesting. But, let's go back. God has a way of kind of knowing what's coming. September 3rd, 2014, this prophetic word, leader of Syria removed a cutting off of the head and arm. Spirit of God speaks to Syria. This is from Pastor Hank. You've touched the children. The Spirit of God says, my patience is no longer, Syria, your restraint. Now a millstone will be tied around the nation. They'll be jerked and pulled to my will now, for they've sought to behead. But now that they that which is risen shall be cut off from the head, and the leader now of Syria shall be removed. For what you've done to the children, what you've allowed to rise up in your land shall be cut off. There will be a noose tying around your neck, a removal of your head, a cutting off of your arms. You shall not arise. And they will ask, what is this? And what has happened? Pastor Hank, this was over 10 years ago.
Yeah, and again, that's why you got to let, prophecies breathe and play out. And, those that might hear that, they might think of the literal head, being cut off, the literal arms. But I think it speaks obviously of the headship that would be Assad and all of the years that his, family were part of the dictatorship and all of the things that happened there, but also the arms. To Lance's point, I think God is saying, look, yeah, there's going to be, arms talking about weapons and these Islamic terrorists and things. God's going to cut that down. That's what he's saying. And, excuse me, we have to go back to something that we've been saying for years, and that is we're in a time of a global reset. And God said it's not about the globalists who say that they're going to have a new world order. God said, I am saying that I'm bringing my order and my reset. And with it will be removals, resets, and watch this, a great awakening. And here's what's going to happen. You look to Damascus. It has a lot of history. Paul got knocked off of his high horse and had a visitation of Jesus. Jesus showed up right there with what we're talking about. And I believe the same is happening for Iran. God prophesied that he would be removed too, and it's happened. It's to create the awakening and to set things up for what God wants to do. And I think we're going to see some great things play out in the earth as we watch leaders being removed and new ones being set in. And watch what people do. They're going to begin to call on the name of the Lord and be saved. It's going to be glorious.
It is. And what I like is that you've got this political landscape that we've talked about tonight, that all of these things are happening, that we're watching unfold, and Trump still has, 41 days left until he gets in. Yeah. So you got that happening. At the same time, what Hank and Dutch have referred to is what God is doing in the earth, and specifically here in America.
That's right.
You've got these different outbreaks. You can see the master planner at work here with what we're seeing with revival and obviously reformation that comes from a true revival that we want to see. So you have to look at both sides, ladies and gentlemen.